My presentation is going to be on Jim Jones in Jonestown and the events that took place in Jonestown. I'm going to explore Jim Jones' life leading up to the events that took place in Ghana, South America, and explore the dynamics and how they relate to applied ethics and the things that we learned in class. I'm going to start with his early life and go through, again, going up to the events that ultimately took place in Jonestown. Well, the early life of Jim Jones, I think it's important to kind of look over briefly. He was born in 1931 in Crete, Indiana. And the thing about Jim Jones, grew up from what I've read, he grew up in extreme poverty. And I'm talking about extreme poverty. Her parents, it was noted that their parents would go foraging sometimes in the woods to supplement their diet. I'm just thinking about that. I'm looking at my office now and there's trees out there. I can't imagine these people are foraging for food. Imagine how hungry you have to be and malnutrition. Also, his mother was very much noted as not having any maternal instincts whatsoever. Somewhat abused, neglected, probably a stronger word. No guidance. I can't imagine being 6 or 7 years old, 9, 10, during those times, and not having a structured environment to be into. And because of that, it was noted that he was obsessed with death and religion. Usually the obsession with religion comes later in life, and I can't imagine being, 11, 12 years old, practicing in the mirror to become a preacher. I've never seen that in my life. A child, it's one thing being Bon Jovi or something like that. It's another, pretending to be a preacher. It's just so odd. It's such an outlier in society. I reference Principle of Harm. It says from class, Principle of Harm is do not do harm to others. And it's clear that their parents had a negative influence on this kid as a child, where his deepest, darkest desires were left unchecked, and he was allowed to dissect and bury animals. Just thinking about it, it makes me cringe a little bit. So there's a lot of unusual behaviors, and I think the other aspect was principle of paternalism. I know I'm probably stretching this a little bit, but I feel like there is an obligation for parents to, it says here, principle of paternalism, assist others in pursuing their best interests when they cannot do for themselves. And that kind of correlates with the parents not being a constructive force in their lives to correcting these behaviors when they're seen. And I think that when we look back, that's the beginning. That's a point going, that makes sense. I mean, look at this kid. I mean, there was early signs of the direction we're going in applied ethics and the responsibilities that we have, not only individually, but as society, as parents, family, peers, etc. Very important. So at the age of 22 years old, he becomes an ordained minister in Indianapolis, and he opens a small interdenominational church in Indianapolis. He actually had this thing that he was funding it, selling monkeys. God knows. Anyway, just a strange guy. But I want to preface certain things that he did in Indiana. He advocated for civil rights. He was actually named director of Indianapolis Human Rights Commission. Indianapolis Human Rights Commission. He was elected as director. And the reason why I mention this is that there's this this aura around him, a young Jim Jones. In order for you to get a type of following, you got to have some type of attraction, right? Some type of someone that looks up to you, making not noise, but making headlines in positive in positive lights. So Jim Jones, obviously, we all know the bad things, but they were mixed with this other reality that this guy was ahead of his time. In the 50s, he was side by side with a lot of African Americans during the time in the 50s, in a time where, in the 50s and the 60s, this is, the height of segregation and attitudes like that in the church. And, Jim Jones seemed to champion that this is wrong. And we all knew it was wrong, right? If you're going to church, you kind of figured out, God, there's this race stuff, and how can we be preaching to God? And then on the other side saying, these people are bad, these people are animals, or whatever the stereotype is. So there was a lot of social benefit that he obtained. It says what social benefit acknowledges the extent to which an action produces benefiting consequences for society. And that's what I'm talking about, where he is championing civil rights, moving the conversation forward, saying that we shouldn't have these laws, we shouldn't have these attitudes in society. I think it's very important. Representing the principles of justice, where it acknowledges a person's right to due process, fair compensation for harm, and fair distribution of benefits, and the principle of honesty. So the outside looking in, if you look at the headlines this guy was generating in Indianapolis in the 50s, it was all positive. It was all positive at the time. And so I think it was 1965, Jones moves about 100 followers to Redwood Valley. But here's when I mentioned some dark side to his childhood. It was rumored, or not rumored, but it gets later known that before this move takes place from Indianapolis to California, he forces 145 of his followers from Indianapolis to forfeit, to basically sign over all their worldly possessions. And if anybody has been involved in the Pentecostal churches, I have been. I have been. And I've seen that, I feel like that's a denomination where someone like Jim Jones, who obviously has this weird charisma. You could tell guys rocking sunglasses during his, he's a handsome looking dude. You could tell this guy was different from the others at the time. But that's what it takes to manipulate people. I think that's, it's like, this guy's herding his flock and forces 145 people to sign over all of their things. So, obviously violates the principle of harm, accentuates a personal benefit, and if you talk to him, and I've seen pastors like this where, they're giving it to God. Yeah, they're giving it to you, brother. And it's about this control. So it's like this dynamic, this weird dynamic where He's making headlines for justice and rights and all that. He is violating them at the same time. At the very same time, he's violating these principles of applied ethics. So in 1965, he's in California, and he starts, Jim Jones starts making headlines and championing poor housing statuses for African Americans. And people love him. It goes to like a few hundred in Indiana, now he's up to like 5,000 followers in California, and purchases another church in L.A. And he gets involved with HUD of all people. And the things that I've been reading, he starts getting a little bit political, and meeting with local mayor races. Even met with Jimmy Carter's wife, which is near and dear to us in Georgia. I mean, that's not Massachusetts, but I understand Jimmy Carter is the man here. So, but yeah, this guy is, really, you're talking to Jimmy Carter's wife. That's pretty significant, I think. But yeah, he's championing HUD, and then a scandal breaks out during this period of time. Again, it's this thing, and it kind of reflects Indiana, where there's a progression from Indiana to California. But before these people leave, he forces them to hand over all their personal possessions. And something similar happens in California, where an article breaks out that this guy's hoarding $5 million. And it was mainly from attacking African American families. How ironic that is, where this guy's getting headlines championing the African Americans, but yet there's this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde side where he's actually taking advantage of them, obviously accentuating his personal benefits, violating people's rights, in a sheep, in wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak, where obviously he has this cloak of helping out people and championing civil rights and championing the less fortunate, but at the same time he's taking advantage of them. So, in my opinion, it was during this time in California, he sends out, I think it was 100 people down to Ghana. He made a trip to Brazil, so he's familiar with Ghana, and he sends a small party to. He starts laying his eyes to Ghana, and the reason for that, I believe, is because he keeps getting caught taking advantage of these people. And when we talk about principles of justice, he's seeking a place to isolate these people where now he can fully have full autonomy over these people and violate them in every way imaginable, free and clear of the laws that are in place in the states, and more importantly, away from those peering eyes. And I think, and obviously, I think, Guyana, I've been pronouncing it wrong the whole time, is super attractive to someone who is dead fixed on violating all these people, being sort of a god, being to have full, again, autonomy over everybody and anybody who is willing to go there. I believe that was spurred on because of he keeps on getting caught, or it keeps on being an issue every time he violates somebody's rights. So Jim Jones finally makes the move with 900 of his followers into Guyana. And as you can see, the layout, I mean, it looks, visually, it's like a camp. It's harmless. Jim Jones pictured a community, which I'm sure all these other people envision a community, everybody following God and the teachings, and unfortunately, Jim Jones had other things in mind. First and foremost, I read he would keep them all these long sermons on a daily basis of him continually brainwashing these guys into believing whatever he wanted them to believe in the rhetoric, and believing that America's laws are bad. They're out to get us. He starts promoting communism. Well, he always has, but now he's really. It's more so about us versus them rather than God, as everybody's out to get him. And at this point, I truly feel it's because he keeps on, like I mentioned before, he got caught taking advantage of these people and violating normal ethical norms that the outside looking in would say this is just simply unethical, and that's what's really happening here, in my opinion. But there were some activities these people had. Farming and grazing, but there's a lot of abuse. They had armed guards. No one, as much as he would say, anybody can leave if they want to. And, we later find out that is completely untrue. He would have, he would have married couples, rat on each other. If one said, hey, I'm thinking about going back, and she could use it as a ploy, or he could use it as a ploy. If she wants to go home, now it's about control within control dynamics, where there's an abusive outline, there's an abusive bubble by Jim Jones in the first place, right? And then within that, if there's any other dynamics in play, they could abuse that person even further, a husband and wife, an abusive husband versus a wife. And try to keep control of him. But these stories of him taking on multiple sex partners. It was really some disturbing things that came out of it. Later on, came out of it. And of course, the practicing of the whole. He was training these people that, hey, we're gonna drink. We're going to drink this just in case it comes down to it. These practice suicide rounds, trying to groom them in case if it's following from Indiana to California to Guyana, where there's no place to go, and that would be it. And that was kind of the that's how he was framing it, where he could envision something happening in Guyana. And ultimately that did happen. There was some complaints from back home about the abusive nature of the living conditions, of the abusiveness with the guards, with Jim Jones, just really disgusting practices that were happening within Jonestown. Ultimately, that brought on an important visitor. So in 1978, word got back. Because remember, you have some people who escaped, very few, but there was still a congregation in California, and word traveled about the rights violations, human rights violations that were taking place in Jonestown during this time. Interesting enough, there was a temple member named Bob Houston who reached out and complained about to his ex-wife about what was going on in Jonestown. And 3 days later, his body was found mutilated next to some train tracks in Guyana. This prompted the visitation by Representative, was it Leo Ryan? Representative Ryan. And so he went down, made a trip in 1978, and at first it was supposed to be him and some other members, and it ballooned to NBC, ABC, some media started showing up, decided to go along with them, and made an event. And I'm sure that put some pressure on well, as far as trying to hide these facts. And so once word got to Jim Jones that these people were going to come, they rehearsed. Hey, this is what you tell them. This is what you say, etc., etc. They're going to ask you if you're free to go. You're going to say, of course, but let's rehearse all this stuff. But behind someone standing with a gun, knowing that if we're watching you, and if you say anything different, there'll be some harm. So he visited, and I think the first few hours went as planned for Jim Jones, and then finally something happened where a member passed along a note who wished to go home, and when that note was passed, there was kind of a spectacle, because I think there was like a kid that was like, "Hey, note was passed. Note was passed." I mean, they had these people watching each other, and that points will go to the person who's ratting the other person out, unfortunately, and that was the case. So, interesting enough, about 20, I think it was like 30 people who decided to go back to the States, and it was at this point Jim Jones decided to send someone to hurt these people, to say the least. The gig was up. So here's like an illustration of Ryan, Representative Ryan's party, and the defectors, the people who were leaving. Were planning on leaving on this Cessna, and I think there was actually two planes. It was a room for there wasn't room enough just for the first one plane that they originally had planned, and they had to bring another plane, and they had to wait for a while. So these people here, as you can see, this ambush here, Jim Jones sent these people to kill Ryan, which, I mean, we're talking about a Representative Ryan. Fun fact, Representative Ryan at the time was good friends with Indiana Congressman Dan Quayle, and he ended up being vice president, of course, under George Bush. And long story short, it could have been talking about rewriting of history. And who knows what Ryan? Ryan was very popular. He could have been president himself. Who knows? But anyway, yeah, they killed Ryan, and a couple of media members, photographers, and some defectors. And Jim Jones knew that this was the beginning of the end. So this actually was the point of no return, right? Where he knew that once word got out that these people were murdered, there's going to be some consequences. There's going to be some consequences to that action of killing a representative. And it also cements the whole fact that there were widespread abuses, to a point that when it was discovered and uncovered, it would promulgate murder. This ultimately led to Jim Jones putting a vat of juice, called Kool-Aid, but it's more like Kool-Aid, I guess, and different flavors. It was also injections, because not everybody, it's worth noting, not everybody. There was an eerie conversation that was recorded when Jim Jones, after he knew he sent out that attack for the representative and knew that these people were dead, and they actually hear it. You hear when the guys come back and actually confirm in this audio tape that the deed is done. And that's when Jim Jones knows there's no point of any return. They're going to come and get me. Everybody's coming down with me. And that's the whole thing. He when we talk about applied ethics, we're talking about the destruction of all of, every principle, personal benefit, social benefit, principle of benevolence, principle of paternalism, principle of harm, principle of honesty, principle of lawfulness. Do not violate the law. Murder. Come on. Principle of autonomy. Forcing those people to stay in there and make no mistake, they were forced. Principle of justice and this overall rights violation of all of them. I mean, pure and simple. It doesn't get any worse than that as far as from soup to nuts, from taking property to manipulation to ultimately taking one's life. There was a conversation between a lady who was still placating to Jim Jones and his authority, but at the same time saying, hey, isn't there another way? There's children. There's some people who don't want to. There's some people who want to live and be with their families, and etc. And Jim Jones would shut that down in this conversation, where he would get other people in the background, telling her to shush, and other people saying, agreeing with her. So you could tell that everybody was on board, but unfortunately, there was people with guns, where it was well known that if anybody would run, they would get shot. And there were injections of the Kool-Aid version of the drink, because for the kids and for anybody who was reluctant, that would just come up to you, stab you with that thing, and inject you. I don't know the proportion of who was forced, but I imagine injections probably be an indicator of, I don't want to drink this. There's a small few that were able to slip the guards, but what a horrific scene ultimately that took place. I mean, look at that picture. I mean, disgusting. It's just all these lives probably who were looking for a different future. We all could understand where social constraints, it's not a perfect life. Living anywhere probably is not perfect. But the idea of community love, it's always going to be appealing. Unfortunately, in this circumstance, it was masked by a man who didn't have any ethical values. And I really believe this thing started at a young age. I think this guy wasn't right from the jump. I think his motives for example, of civil rights were taking advantage of people who were black. Maybe he felt like he had a niche there. I do well with manipulating elderly and giving it up. You know what I mean? In the name of God. And it happens today. Like I said, I've been, I used to date a girl who's in the Pentecostal church, and I don't want to paint everybody. I want to paint everybody in that spectrum, but man, boy, I could see it. It wasn't hard not to see, that enthusiasm. It's based on a lot of emotions, and emotions a lot of times carry you to make bad decisions. And they have a lot of music, and the pastors usually, very vocal and passionate, and people like that. People gravitate to that, and it's unfortunate that that we as human beings could have alternative motives and do harm and destroy every ethical principle that violates people in general. It's just really sad to see. Here's my works cited, all the images I used for the slides. I'm so sorry I went over. I don't know how to do this. Those are my images, and these are my source material, the YouTube video, Georgetown Massacre Explained, and it's a big YouTube video, CBS, this one should be CBS, on YouTube, and all this material that I looked up. Thank you.